BAS in the cloud. One of my favorites. So, yesterday in our keynotes at Trade from Code Labs did a fantastic job of helping us understand some of the benefits of putting BAS in the cloud. And I want to reiterate some of those points that he made at the beginning, which, why is BAS in the cloud going to happen? Okay, because it's going to happen. For those people who say, oh Scott, no, it's not. I'm like, no, it's going to happen, okay? Now, as we all know in the BAS industry, we are like one of the slowest industries to evolve. So it's taken us a while. Everybody else has already done this, right? So it's not like we're going into the unknown, okay? So with that, I believe BAS will be in the cloud, which means the buildings will operate with a cloud connection, and there will be all sorts of new ways of using the cloud for services, for everything, which we're going to talk about on this panel today. So here's what is going to drive this, I believe, and Etcher pointed this out yesterday. Here's some of the key factors that are going to drive it. Number one, using a cloud greatly lowers the cost of operating and essentially every part of the project. How does it lower that cost? First and foremost, when we put software on an owner's network, even if it's on their own data centers, there's a huge cost to that to the owner. I have sat in meetings with, more on the government side, where we have the IT department and the facilities department, and then we present to the IT department that we want to put software on their server, and I literally see them licking their chops. They're like, oh yeah, that's an internal cost of $25,000 a second. I love the government. You guys are awesome, the way you spend money on each other. But no, it's true cost. And because when we run something on-prem and do it properly with an IT department, and they cyber secure it properly, and they make the right, they add the right software to manage it properly, huge cost, okay? So moving that function up to the internet, creating a single secure connection to it, brings a lot of costs off the projects, a lot of operating costs out of the building, okay? So it certainly lowers costs. And there are other ways, and Etcher told us other ways it lowers costs, so huge lower costs. The other one, this is huge, you guys, because I personally take some fault in this, and I do apologize to the cybersecurity community on the regular for this, but when we got Tritium, right, we ran out and we put servers on-prem all over the place, you guys, everywhere. And we did it for like 20 years. Oops! Damn, I told you we move slow, right? Well, okay, circa 20 years later, wrong way to do it. Why? Well, because when we put the server on-prem, like a Jace, and then we say, okay, Mr. Building Owner, no problem, it's just a website. You just got to go to the Jace to see it. Well, guess what we're doing? We're inviting the world into their building to look at their HVAC data, okay? Because the server's on-prem, it's inside of their network. It's below their firewalls, it's below their protection layers. So by doing that, essentially, they have to expose their network to the world. Which, guess what? Most sites don't want to do that anymore, okay? So, yeah, we did it, and we have to go fix it, these buildings. And at Cochran Supply, we're working hard with our customers to do that now. We offer a service, we call it N4Pass, and we've seen a huge uptick in it. And it's essentially a Niagara hosting service that our IT guys manage and work with you guys to set up and manage. But most of the increase in business there is because of the cybersecurity concerns of all these Jaces that are on-prem. And the right way to fix that is to create a single cloud connection, work with the internal IT department within the facility, so it's managed. They can see it, you can see it. There's liability on both sides, but you're both managing it. And then the data is up on a cloud, so anybody who wants to look at the building data is not coming into the building, they're simply going to a cloud, where the data could be essentially a digital twin of what's in the building, and reducing the cybersecurity liability, okay? So this is a big trend. We see it happening all the time. We think it's going to continue to increase as more people realize that they have a server on-prem that's being exposed to the internet, right? Now the third reason that Etra brought up, and a huge reason I believe too, is simple scale with the cloud. There's so much new software coming, right? Who was scared by the ChatGPT thing? You should be. Dude, Jacob took away like 80% of your jobs yesterday. I'm sorry, but you're all gonna have to find something else to do. Because the technology and the software side is moving so fast. And to scale your capabilities in the building over time, that cloud can scale. That cloud can change. That cloud can do all sorts of cool things. You can't do that on-prem, not without massive, massive costs. Not to mention at the cloud layer, as your enterprise grows as a building owner or a contractor, whatever you're doing, we don't have to go back in and add servers, worry about capacity, things like that. With the services out there, you can scale up to as much data as you'll need. And with all the new IP devices in this new era of all IP connected everything, the amount of data that we're gonna have to manage is gonna go up. And we're gonna need to be able to scale properly as an industry. And we won't be able to do it on-prem. We will have to use clouds to do that. So that, to me, are the three major reasons why cloud will take over BAS if it hasn't already. And we're gonna kind of dissect this now with my panel. They have a panel of experts. Each one's gonna kind of talk in one of their segments that they work on. My first panelist is Brian Oswald. Brian's with CBRE ESI. And Brian stood up a BAS as a service 10 years ago? About 10 years ago. So they've been doing this for about 10 years, and I'm gonna let Brian introduce himself and tell us a little bit about their journey with the cloud. Brian?
Great, thanks Scott. Good morning everyone. Pleasure to be here, pleasure to speak on this topic with this panelist. As Scott said, we've been doing BAS in the cloud for about 10 years. And in full transparency, it's been a little bit of full cloud, a little bit of hybrid cloud, and still some on-prem deployments. It's just kind of the nature of what we do and why we do it for the client base that we have. Not everyone has fully adopted that approach, and that's fine. So we have to maintain a level of flexibility. However, the demand for BAS in the cloud is real. And the approach that we've taken in trying to maintain flexibility is good, but inevitably we need to get to a more standardized approach for a lot of reasons. We come at it from a bit of a unique position, right? ESI as a core company is a systems integration firm. CBRE as a core company is a global facility management firm. So for us to put BAS in the cloud does enhance our ability to scale, but it also gives us the opportunity to push different applications on top of that. Microservices, integrations to CMMS platforms, integrations in bill pay, so on and so forth. So it's a huge enablement for us to do more with that data, to do more with site operations at a global scale that we don't necessarily have today. And Scott's right, the adoption, it's been mixed, it's been slow, it hasn't been necessarily what we thought it would be, and we've hit some speed bumps regarding cybersecurity and network concerns. But as the technology evolves, as the networks have evolved, so has the trust factor in this being a viable solution for clients. And that's really been our focus as a service provider.
Brian, could you speak to how much more competitive you are in operating a building with your services versus, some on-prem solutions with what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, purely from a labor standpoint, when we started, we had a rather large enterprise client that we've been executing work for the last 24 months. And as we were standing up our EMEA operations, we were able to deploy with US-based resources because of the BAS being in the cloud at a significantly less overhead expense. Because I'm not having to go and find the partners or hire people and train the people. I'm able to leverage our own people to go out and do that work, which made it that much more efficient. As far as a service provider standpoint, the ideal ratio, there is no ideal ratio, but I'll throw a number out there. If we can get to a point where 60% of services in a building are handled by physical technicians and 40% are handled by virtual technicians, that's a huge win. And those are real cost savings numbers that are not impacted by the energy of that building. it's truly the OpEx savings that you're going to see, in conjunction with the fact that there's just not the technicians out there. So any way we can leverage that data, leverage the deployment of that data in a more efficient manner, will lend itself to a greater opportunity for us to be more efficient in our service delivery.
So just to reiterate, you have a centralized team of developers working on your cloud solution, and you're deploying worldwide with one centralized group.
Correct.
So again, think about that in terms of the cost and the scale and what they're able to accomplish with that simple concept, right? Being able to focus on a certain group, but deploy worldwide. I know not everybody gets these worldwide opportunities like Brian, but hey, if you do, there you go. So, but great, thank you, Brian. Awesome. So let's kick it over to Greg, Mr. Fitzpatrick. So Greg Fitzpatrick and I have had a long journey together. Greg works for Cochran Supplies, our business development expert. He works with the design community on OT networks and its adoption. But how long ago, Greg, did we get together? When did we start working together?
I think it was when we first picked up the Niagara line.
Well, no, but actually for Cochran, 5-7 years ago?
6 years.
6 years ago. So 6 years ago. So Greg, consulting engineer, director of buildings for a couple end users, managed some huge, projects. And of course, I had sold to Greg for years, right? And he and I had a lot of fun developing Niagara specifications and building out some big infrastructures. And then I realized in order for us to impact, really get this OT network going with cloud-connected IP devices, we needed to change design. And so Greg and I got together, and Greg that's been his mission ever since he's been at Cochran Supplies, to influence design, to try and get the adoption of IP and cloud-connected devices. And so with that, Greg Fitzpatrick, could you introduce yourself a little more, and then could you tell our audience a little bit about your journey so far on that?
Yeah, well, I've been in the industry for about 30 years now. I'm gonna look a little too young to have been in the industry for 30 years, but yeah, I've been in the industry for about 30 years. Started off as a consulting engineer, ran my own firm for a handful of years, worked for both carrier and trade, selling equipment and controls, turnkey projects, performance contracts, the whole gamut, and went off and worked for a large school-bound program right here in Detroit that managed a $1.3 billion bond. And I was commissioning manager and chief mechanical design manager there, and oversaw the engineers. Then I started in facilities and ran into Scott during my journey at some point and brought Niagara to the school district. And leadership looked at it like it was just pure sorcery, right, at the time. And we did some really, really cool things back then. But during that journey, I took the best practices from every commissioning firm that I had brought into Detroit Public Schools and started my own commissioning firm. The program was over and ran for 7 years. So in other words, I've been around the block a few times, and I've seen a lot during my journey. And one of the things that I can say, when you think about BAS in the cloud, the first thing that came to my mind was commissioning, right? Because commissioning is pretty much that BMS commissioning is pretty much that last 10% of the job, right? You're going through commissioning, you're finding deficiencies and things like that, and then, the rubber meets the road when you go to that Niagara station or whatever your integration platform is, and you start commissioning, right? After you leave the equipment, you start doing your point-to-point checks, and you start functionally testing the systems. And the first thing I thought about is you want to be able to set up your station as quickly as possible, right? You have access to all of your equipment, all of your systems, all of your devices. And what better way to do that in a secure manner than to have and host your Niagara station in the cloud, right? So now you're not waiting for an IT department to start this functional testing and making sure that outdoor air sensor communicates with that air handler on the first floor. Now you can immediately start testing that equipment as you go as an MSI without a lot of issues, and you know that you have a secure connection because there's a third-party host involved that manages all that risk, manages all those software updates,
So obviously here in Detroit, we've had a lot of success with getting, and a lot of it due to great companies like Bedrock here in town and Ford and their adoption of technology has been they've been great advocates here to get other people to follow that design. But Greg, you've traveled around the country for me to our other branches, locations. Could you speak to the adoption rate of this new methodology as you've walked into all these different design firms everywhere, what it's like there?
Well, it's been slow, but one of the things that I've tried to do is simplify the process, because every consulting firm, some of the larger firms like Google, they figured it out. They've got technology groups in place, right? But your average firm, they only have a handful of people, and the typical firm doesn't have a controls group. You may have a BAS who has a controls group, and part of it is getting them to understand that they don't have to totally recreate the wheel when it comes to their plans and specifications. We have products and work products like systems integration drawings. Like we've been trying to get firms to adopt the systems integration drawing, which is a step above these typical systems architecture drawing that you see, right? So in other words, a systems integration drawing is going to show you where your Niagara station is being deployed. Is it in the cloud? Is it on an on-prem server, right? Is it at a data center? Data center is going to show you where your network management switches are, where your router is, where your VPN devices are. Is there a cell phone? Is it totally segregated from your IT network? All these things are on the drawing, in addition to what we like to call the OT network and the FCAM, right? All that hardware that's there, the power distribution, the UPS, all that stuff is shown in one drawing, in addition to the fiber, the switches, right? And then a portion of the subnet. So this gives them a total picture of what that entire network looks like.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so now, this is when Greg's story gets interesting, right? So now Greg's been hanging out at Cochran Supply for a couple years, and Scott keeps going to this conference called Realcomm, and then Realcomm says, hey Scott, we need a new chairman for this RAC group. And I'm like, what's RAC? And they're like, oh, it's our CIO group. It's CIOs of large real estate holders. And they're like, would you be interested? And I says, well, no, but I have just the person.
And he didn't tell me about it.
Because as I've worked with that group for a long time, they are always asking me how to do this. Because they're CIOs and they're like, how do we fix this construction thing for our companies so we're not like fixing cybersecurity nightmares after construction? So I thought, who better to help that than Greg Fitzpatrick? So Greg has gotten involved with these CIOs, and Greg, your first thoughts?
It's been interesting. I want to say that, and it's been interesting in a good way. And it's because they all understand that there's an issue there, right? When you talk about OT cybersecurity, the first thing you think is industrial. Because anytime you Google OT cybersecurity, you're going to see something that comes up regarding industrial controls. Well, there's a huge difference between the commercial real estate market and the industrial market, right? And what we want to do now is create what I like to call, and I want everyone to remember this, cyber harmony within our industry. Meaning, all the building stakeholders, the architects, the engineers, the manufacturers, the MSIs, the commission agents. Has anyone out here ever heard of a cyber commissioning process? Right? Right. So, and it's in its very infant stages right now. There's only a few people that are doing it, but the masses don't understand what it means to commission cyber, right? Some people may know what pen testing is, or penetration testing is, but there's no process that's been adopted by the BCA or the ACG or any of the other commissioning organizations regarding cyber commissioning. So what I'm trying to do is connect the dots, get the OT and IT environments together, and all these thought leaders in the same room, and solve some of these problems. Because there's no reason, all the information is out there, right? We know what needs to be done, but we just need a platform to create that cyber harmony and get everyone on board. And one of the first things that I did was told all of these CIOs and CTOs of these large real estate organizations is, your responsibility as a major together a set of owner's project requirements regarding how to deploy technology in your built environment. What do you want to see the MSIs do? What policies do you want them to follow when it comes to deploying this technology in their built environment? And get those OPRs to the engineering firms that you're hiring, right? When you look at engineering firms and their capabilities, you know, you have the large firms, then you have the small firms, and everyone in between. And my message to them was, you're not necessarily going to always have, you know, a very capable systems integrator working on your project, because your project may not be that large. So you have to have OT cyber governance teams, right? Who's going to bird dog and follow that process all the way through commissioning. We're going to sit in these commission meetings. We're going to make sure that your owner's project requirements ended up in the specification. So that's one of the main things that we're doing as far as trying to create that cyber harmony in our industry. And it's going to take everyone in this room.
I love that term, cyber harmony, you guys. Isn't that cool? I love that thought, and that's a great way to think about it, because there are so many moving parts that we got to bring together as an industry to bring that, make that work right. All right, thank you, Greg. So let's move on. So as Greg can tell you, there's a lot of different consulting firms out there, and some have jumped into this, some have not. And then there's Newcomb and Boyd. They do this this is their business, and Donnie has led an incredible journey here. In his business growth is immense because there's just not enough of them. So Donnie and Newcomb and Boyd, they focus on that integrated, cloud-connected IP, you know, connect everything in your building approach to design. And Donnie, could you share with us a little bit about what you're seeing now and the journey you guys have seen to get here?
Sure, yeah. As we talk about BAS in the cloud and getting our things on the network and the struggles that we see of getting adoption and some of the things that you were talking about, one of the things that we're advocating for and really pushing is operational technology as a discipline. Because what we're seeing with the MEPs and folks that have varying levels of understanding and adoption and those types of things is we're going to a mechanical engineer that has to be thinking about all of the energy strategies that we talked about earlier, all of the nuances and system designs in mechanical engineering, and then we're trying to take that same person and pull them into a conversation and say, have you thought about the cyber? Are we going to be in the cloud? What's the IP addressing scheme? And so they're glazing over, but yet at the same time we're trying to give this information to a mechanical engineer and say, put this in your specs. And so, just like you would never ask a mechanical engineer to sign and seal the structural drawings because they're not qualified.
That makes sense as to why everybody's so annoyed with Greg.
So, what we did when we started our intelligent buildings group is that we were really focused initially on clients that wanted to do intelligent buildings. The reason that we've grown the way that we have is because what a lot of our clients came back to us and said, I don't want an intelligent building, I want a good building. I want a building that works properly and that is secure and all these different things. And so we said, the skill that we developed in focusing on intelligent buildings is operational technology. So we started this group that really focuses on that. So a lot of the design that we're doing now, both in-house and we're working with other engineering firms, is to say, rather than you be so concerned about all of that technology piece, you just focus on the mechanical design and get that right. We're going to offload that technology piece and put that as a part of this whole network design, the operational technology. We're going to work with the IT team and figure out those kinds of strategies and then get that right. So,
gotcha. And so OT network, obviously cloud connected. So you work with a lot of different clients, Donnie. Could you speak to and you work directly with the end users, good. So like a lot of times you want to bring the cloud in, I'm sure. Could you speak to how they look at that, or your different customers in different segments look at a cloud-connected smart building?
Yeah, absolutely. The applications and analysis and a lot of the things that were talked about on the previous call, that's happening in the cloud. And so somehow we're going from what you described earlier of I've just got things on the network and it can talk to anything, and you've got this complete unsecured environment, because that data has to get to that cloud. Or you set up a strategy to say, I want all of my network connected things to be secured and hardened and able to talk, but only able to talk to what I dictate they can talk through that zero trust environment. And then I'm pushing the application out to the cloud so it's accessible. And now I can have cloud-to-cloud strategies for how to share my data. So now I can have a single source of truth that is outside of the IT environment and can easily share that data with all these other reporting tools. And so that's typically where we're having those conversations is let's design with the end in mind, figure out what we're trying to do with the data, and then where's the right place. But there's definitely still a conversation to be had about that piece that's in the cloud. Is that my actual BAS, or is that my software overlay that interfaces with my BAS? That piece is still being developed.
All right, so I'm gonna stump you maybe here. All right, so what is the proper way to specify that? Where does that scope? Okay, so from the OT network up to the cloud, is there a separation of scope? And if so, could you explain the different entities that would take on that work for these specifications?
So are you saying kind of the different players that are involved between?
Yeah, you guys design an OT network, you design a cloud connected. Who does that in the construction process according to your specification? What type of entity does that scope of work?
So when we are designing the OT strategy, we're trying to make sure that each piece of that work is being done by an entity that specializes in that. So sometimes there are integrators that have a really strong network team, that have their own cabling groups and all these other things, but in most cases that's not the case. And so we're putting a responsibility matrix together that says, I have all these IT devices, they're not back-end shadow networks, we've thought about them, we've planned them, we know that the drop goes from A to B, and so that's done by a structured cabling contractor. We also have a network that's our operational technology network that sometimes, depending on the entity, may have some convergence to the enterprise, may be completely separate because it just serves the building. But that's going in by a network integrator that is their daily work is to install those networks, understand the security requirements, how to harden it, and all of that. And then you have your application, which is really your integrator that's doing both endpoint installation or subbing that out, and doing all of the programming, system mapping, and putting that information, sometimes in the cloud, sometimes on-prem, sometimes a hybrid of the two. But that's your systems integrator.
And are there integrators that can do it all?
There are.
And do you see that as an advantage to the end user, or not necessarily?
No, definitely. It's kind of market by market. So in the commercial market, when someone's building, a spec office building, and they have one integrator that they can turn to and say, so you're able to handle the network, securing it, getting that installed, all of my endpoints, managing my front end, is that single go-to. That's great. In large institutional clients for universities and hospitals and all that, they have so many people involved in that same area that they just really want a systems integrator that can get the system right, and they'll take care of the infrastructure.
Gotcha. Okay, change line of questions a little bit for you, Donnie. Let's talk about liability and cybersecurity with cloud-connected systems. Obviously there's going to be liability in design. Any mechanical design we know carries the liability and whatnot. So could you speak to that as somebody who's designing cloud-connected systems and the liability that you guys look at?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I mentioned the BAS in the cloud versus my system in the cloud that's talking to the BAS, because at the end of the day, every building that we design, we're looking at how does that building function if I lose outside connectivity. The smart controllers are at least going to continue to do their thing, but is there enough intelligence in the building that you can run that building local to that building? You may lose your optimization, your insights, your reporting, all those great things that are happening in the cloud, but can I still manage that building? Because that's the primary risk is that something happens to that cloud application, and now I'm dead in the water. I can't run my building.
Anything you can share with legal liability that you guys look at to protect yourselves from potential cybersecurity threats based on your design? Have you run into that yet?
So definitely that contracts from the design community that are being written, where you're looking at what your insurance requirements are for this, that, and the other. It was only a few years ago that someone even brought up what's your cyber insurance policy?
Okay.
And now you're seeing, contracts that are coming through, AIA and big developments. And
So
they're
you need to
specified,
carry that, so you
this
need
is
to
a $2
carry
million
that.
policy or a $5 million policy.
So they're asking for it now,
That's
when they come to you. Interesting, interesting. And what about the contractors or the integrators putting it in? Does the liability fall onto them in any way? And do you see them carrying insurance to cover themselves for it?
They're having to carry the insurance as well.
Okay.
And the liability is even stronger at that site because you may have a document that says how you're supposed to harden these things, but if it didn't actually happen, now that's even worse because it's like, well, you had a document that told you what to do and you didn't do it, so you're kind of on the hook for that.
Greg, we got a new product, man. We're gonna start selling insurance. You all need it, trust me, because like I said, remember that Jay story at the beginning? Oops. Just saying, I'm kidding. We haven't seen any of that. All right. Thank you, Donnie. Thank you very much. All right. Our next panelist, Stephen Halicki. Tritium. This guy's the master architect of Tritium now. And as we all know, the Niagara framework is in many of our projects. And when we look at the BAS in the cloud, of course, the key is software. The key is software, on-prem software that can organize, manage, and deliver it to the cloud in a cybersecure manner. And this guy is responsible for all that right now. So, Stephen, could you speak to the tools within Niagara and how they really have made this easy for our integration community, some of that, and then we'll get into cybersecurity.
Sounds great.
Cool.
It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. And some of the discussion, I think I'm seeing some of the intersection between really how important it is to communicate throughout this entire process. I really think we can emphasize that enough. All stakeholders that are involved need to be constantly engaged to ensure we're all abreast of what's going on. It's doing the last bits of commissioning from a cyber standpoint. Some of these things are so important. And to that end, one thing that we've done, at least at Tritium, is we have an N4 hardening guide. And if you're not aware of that, please go to tritium.com. We have it published for your use. If you are standing up a Niagara-based instance and you're going to be interacting with the cloud, we really encourage you to take a look at that because we have some best practices that we've enumerated in that document, but of course it doesn't just stop there. You have to build the right things into the product, and that's where our secure by default principle really shines. And what that means is at the first time that you are creating a station, you have all of the most secure parameters selected. Now, if you wanted to degrade that, I don't know why you would want to, but there are some use cases. Let's say there's no interaction with the cloud. You're dealing with some legacy-based systems and you need to integrate them. That could be a reason why you want to, let's say, go to a TLS 1.2, TLS 1. But the thing is that when you're interacting with the cloud, let's face it, that's where we're heading. You can't compromise anymore. And that's why that secure by default principle is so important to what we do. We want to force people to do the right thing at the start. But the thing is, it's a journey. You don't just select something, just leave it. It's something that has to be continuously verified. You have to stay on your toes. Because let's face it, I mean, we had a great panel discussion. Appreciate Greg putting that together. And just the number of ransomware attacks, cyber attacks, I mean, they happen by the week. Just Oakland, California, I just got an update on it. They're still quantifying the impact of a ransomware attack. Their entire public service department's been hijacked. They're estimating at the moment and over $1 million. Now, New Orleans faced one in 2019. Now, that's just on a public city system. Imagine if it's happening at a building. Let's say they take it over, and let's say that the hacker has figured out how to control your chiller. And let's say they're cycling that compressor on and off, on and off, on and off. Next thing you know, that chiller's down. It's a $250,000, $300,000 piece of equipment. And when it goes down, what happens? You have to pull in a portable chiller, park it on the side of the street.
Terrifying everybody.
I will.
Could you stop, please?
You know,
Scared the crap out of everybody. Come on, man.
The thing is,
let's talk about how we fix that, Stephen, with the Niagara software, right?
Exactly.
So let's start with authentication. Let's start with that feature.
Absolutely.
Yeah, before everybody like runs out of here with their hair on fire, please. So let's talk about a layer that's important, authentication. Could you touch on how Niagara makes it easy for us to, you know, and what authentication is and how we use Niagara to help owners manage that?
Absolutely. So if you're doing it with the cloud, for example, I mean, there's going to be, a couple things you need to bear in mind. So if you have APIs interacting with your Niagara instance, you have, for example, you could use token-based authentication, and that's kind of a commonly utilized method for API interaction with some of the endpoints in the building. What that uses is just a client secret and ID. Of course, it gets encoded, and that's kind of used as the fundamental piece of authentication that's essentially saying, yes, this API can go right to that point, or yes, this API can call that data and pull it into an application.
And oftentimes the building owner will have a scheme for that you can simply follow, correct? And we can change the Niagara framework to meet that.
That's right. In fact, we support OpenAuth, which again is a commonly used form of authentication.
Yep.
Definitely necessary for email services, for example. That's something that you've seen Microsoft and Google get serious with. And I think that's the thing. You're seeing, I think the entire community embrace these stronger authentication principles. And it's really because they're scared at the end of the day. Nobody wants to face that liability. I don't want to be the person that's going to, children went down and I've got tenants that are unhappy. Now I'm held accountable for that.
Absolutely, and of course, as we all know, we don't often get the option to not be on the owner's network, right? The owners, in some cases, want to control that. They have the proper resources in place, and they VLAN it, they manage it. It's cool. I mean, it's their cost. They can decide to do that. So in terms of encryption, especially in those joint network environments, could you speak to how the Niagara framework helps us by encrypting that data versus some of the traditional IP methods we've been using?
Absolutely. Certificates. Love that word here. Love it. So certificates are going to be the primary means of encrypting data from point A to point B. So within the Niagara framework, for example, we have FOXS, and as part of that, you have to have certificates between your server and client. And that's what's forming that kind of essential layer of encryption as the, of course, data goes from the supervisor to the JSON or even below that. In addition to that, one thing I wanted to note here is that if you haven't seen this before, we do have something called the security dashboard within the Niagara framework. It is really a one-stop shop to get really the disposition of that particular instance from a security standpoint. If you've got a bunch of users that are all super users, which of course we're not doing that, right? So we're going to flag it, we're going to put an alert up there, but it's more than that. It's more than just notifying the end user BSI, it's providing them a description as to why that is a bad decision. Now, as we talk about what are some of the other primary means of encrypting, BACnet Secure Connect. So that's going to address one of the most, I think, fundamental concerns that the industry has with BACnet over IP today. And of course, a fundamental principle of BACnet Secure Connect is that you have full encrypted connections between all of your devices. And how is it being encrypted? Certificates.
Well, thanks for putting certificate management into the Niagara framework, Stephen, because obviously we're going to need it, right?
Always.
Always.
And remember, this is a commonly utilized principle in the industry. PKI, for example, key infrastructure, that's something that is a principle that, of course, we didn't invent, but in the interest of serving the community, in the interest of serving you all with the right functionality, it's something that, of course, we had to get serious about.
Yeah, cool. Okay, Stephen, so then, the last piece of this is updates, right? So we're getting constant rev updates from Niagara. Minor rev updates, major rev updates, more frequently than ever. Could you speak to how much time is put into cybersecurity in each one of those updates? Like, because every one I see a new cybersecurity something. But how much, from a development standpoint, how much time are you guys spending on that?
Annually, over 1,000 hours. So you can quantify that impact once you put the labor rate per hour. But the reason why is because we're serious about that. And the reason why, if you're asking, hey, you guys have been releasing every quarter, the reason why is because we want to ensure that you have access to the most secure and stable instance of the Niagara framework as possible.
Why are you updating it so frequently?
Because we're a Java-based product. In addition to that, there are plenty of vulnerabilities that get reported. Think about Chrome, for example. How many times have you had to update your browser over the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Probably once, at least. So in order for us to stay on top of these vulnerabilities, we have to get into a cadence where we are releasing about every 90 days because it ensures that we can pick up any of those patches. And then of course at the Java layer, which is the most fundamental layer of our product, our Java vendors are patching vulnerabilities every week, really. And they produce quarterly updates to ensure that every Java-based product is secure.
And so Stephen, what is the only way we're going to be able to keep these buildings secure over time? To keep them updated? What's the best way to do it, right? Cloud can...
I think he was going to say the cloud.
I was going to... I just... Right? I mean, think about it. I mean, if we have to do updates like every week to secure these infrastructures, what are we going to show up with a USB stick every week? I mean, you know, like...
Trucks rolling every hour.
Exactly. So that... Wouldn't you say that's a hugely important part of that cloud community and how we can really get on top of cybersecurity with it?
Absolutely.
All right. So again, part of that cybersecurity story and the software story is the need to update these systems on the regular. And to do that, unfortunately, they have to be connected to the internet. And of course, to manage that, of course, the cloud needs to be involved. So just more reason why we're headed to the cloud, folks. So thank you, Stephen. All right, moving it over to Martin. So we had a great presentation from Martin yesterday. I think Martin mentioned, he mentioned it in his presentation, but when I first met Martin and we were talking about Cochrane Supply and Distech together, I said to Martin, I just want those IP controllers. And he's like, really? That's all you want? And I'm like, yeah, Martin. When Martin and I were together in some of our first meetings, like he's got some super smart people that work with him, and I do too. And this was a long time ago, and we were talking about open standards and products. And Martin's smart guy came in, and he looked at Martin, and he's like, Martin, we're more open than anybody. We're MQTT. And Martin and I both looked at each other, and we're like, what is MQTT? You know, so. But Distech has embedded those technologies into their controllers for years. I mean, like 10, 12 years ago, they were putting technology into the controller to really enable us to connect it to networks, to clouds in numerous different ways. And they continue to innovate in that way with their latest products. So, Martin, could you share a little bit about your products, Distech's journey with all that, and some thoughts on where you're headed?
Yeah, definitely. So we were talking yesterday about the migration of the technology from NSTP to IP, and we were introducing words like REST API and MQTT and ways to access the device in a different way than the normal backnet access in order to gain more speed, gain more connectivity. But I'm happy to announce you something for all the people that are in the room today that are already using Distech controls, is that cloud is not something so distant from you. So every Eclipse device so far that you've bought from Cochrane is already in the cloud. Is that a surprise? So yes. I'm going to introduce other words to you today other than REST API and MQTT. I'm going to introduce IoT Hub and Reverse Proxy. So IoT Hub is a Microsoft service that makes a mirror. It made a mirror before even the digital twin term ever existed. So it's making a digital twin of the device in the cloud. So when you're making a query to a Distech IP devices, you're outside of the building. You're not making a device directly to, you're not making a query through a VPN and a router and back in the building. You're accessing directly the cloud because there's a virtual copy of an Eclipse controller in the cloud already. That, so far, you don't even have to pay for it. Because at Acuity, we have a big contract with Microsoft Azure, so we have the pleasure to enjoy a lot of space in the cloud, and we're making all of this accessible to you. So that is enabling a lot of partners, ecosystem, to access the information without always asking the building owner, can I have access to VPN? Can I have access to whatever? Can I have access to the system? No, you just have to have access to the cloud. Just like you're probably not wondering in your home, how do you connect to a thermostat of Nest or Ecobee? It's just there, it's just on an app, and you're not communicating to your home, you're communicating to the cloud. And there's a service between the cloud and your home which is constantly active. So this is what we call future-proof. And IP can be used as, hey, it's a faster communication system than BACnet and STP. It's only within the building, or it can really be a source for you to make the building future-proof.
Wow. Wow. You're always amazing me, Martin. That's new info. Pretty cool. I did not know that. Did anybody else know that about all your controllers?
Well, the last time, Scott, we were together and we were amazed by our technical guy and made sure that I would never look dumb anymore.
I can't say the same. So Martin,
and I can give you an application example to that. So let's say you're a building owner downtown here, and you want to make all the user of the building, you want them to have access to an app to adjust the temperature of their room, adjust the sunlight position, adjust their light in their individual room. So either you're locked into an environment that you're going to use the Distech My Personify app, and then you're making everybody to learn that. But maybe there's another app provider in the building that is providing other service to the user. So a service, a Bedrock, for example. I don't know if you provide an app to all the tenants that you have, but maybe if you have a Bedrock app to the tenant, you don't want to provide another app in this specific building where you have Distech controls installed. You should have Distech controls in every building, but let's say you don't have yet. So, however, you want to have access to the same information of the temperature adjustment and the set point for the sunlight and whatever BMS functionality in this other app. But then this other app provider is calling in the building and say, hey, how do I connect? No, don't connect to the building, just connect to the IoT Hub cloud service and access the information there. And then we're making sure as a manufacturer that this has always a secure connection within the building and it's fast. You don't need to make everybody that just is good at designing an app on how to connect to a BMS system with a decent speed. So that is enabling, I would say, the future and all sorts of application in buildings. So I'm just happy to say, just in a conclusion, that you're already in the cloud to a certain extent. And one other thing I want to add is that there's a little bit of an elephant in the room from a construction point of view. So cloud is great, but most of the application provider in the cloud, they want to be paid by month on a subscription basis. Our construction industry is, I would say, not necessarily slow, but we're working, we are working on a different foundation. We're working on a foundation of CapEx. So you're going to build a building, it's going to cost you $100 million, you're going to get a loan for that, and that's it. you really wanted to receive the keys of the building and you want to own everything in the building. Imagine if the window provider would say, hey, the window are $199 a month for the next 100 years. It doesn't work like that. So they're paying everything on a CapEx point of view. Why would they pay on a 100 million business? The BMS is how much, and the service of the supervisor is how much? A building owner would say, wait, no, don't, please, don't make me headache with only having a little portion of the building which is not belonging to me. So we need to cope with that. So that's why there's a transition going on into the industry, and we're going to have to find the right balance between what's in the building, what's on the edge, and what's in the cloud, and when the handover is being made. It's really nice to hear about Bedrock. They are a big property owner in town, and they can decide what they want to do. But if you're a single owner of a building and you have one building, you might not have the luxury of having a cloud. You just want to own the building, and rather if it's in the cloud or in the building, you have one, so you don't necessarily care. So this industry is going to go through a lot of evolution, and the migration to the cloud is there. And like I said, you're already in the cloud if you're using this Tech Eclipse device. But the real migration and taking really the value of cloud BMS is yet to happen, but it will happen, and this community is going to be there to capture the value. So I'm really happy to see that.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. You referenced like that call home strategy in the Eclipse line. So do you see that going into all your products in the future? Is that just sort of by default now that it's going to have a call home strategy?
By default, every Eclipse already have this for many years.
Awesome, awesome. That was great. All right, so we're almost out of time. I got time for just maybe a question or two. So any questions from the audience? For anybody? Yes, in the back.
From a design criteria, we used to Division 25, it's finally getting some effective. Is the OT network going to go to another division, or how do you, I know you talked about that matrix that you use, which I think is really an effective way, but is the industry looking at changing maybe the way specifications are structured now? With the cloud in particular?
So we see all of that as a part of Division 25, so just like your communications riser accompanies your Div 27 spec, your OT network and everything that goes into the system side of the BAS and all of your controls and all of that, your servers, all of that is a part of the Div 25. And so that OT series of drawings, just the drawings that basically tells you how to implement what's in that Div 25 spec. And within Division 25, I think we currently have 7 or 8 different specifications within that, so it's getting more specific into all the different parts of the operational technology. But then we're also tying back to the Div 26 for electrical, plumbing, mechanical. We're making sure that there are those ties back to Div 25 that have the cybersecurity hardening requirements of any technology that shows up in any discipline, that is a part of the entire ecosystem, and that they're not orphaned without being a part of that and becoming your vulnerability.
Thanks, great question. One more question?
Yeah, this question is in regards to the, once the data is in the cloud, is it still a proprietary protocol? I mean, or an open protocol, or what kind of communication is that data coming across there?
I think, Stephen, do you mind handling that?
I'd love to. Yeah, so I think he's touching on a very important topic. And we are now here where open protocols have been in existence since the 90s. They've addressed some of the old kind of proprietary siloed way we used to do business. Now, certainly, I think one thing he's touching on, I'm glad he brought this up, is that as we proliferate the use of cloud technologies and as everyone creates their own data store that can be queried by any analytics application, there will be this new environment where everybody has their own kind of unique set of APIs that you have to utilize to interact with that data set. So I know what you were getting at there. And I think that is one of, I think, the most important things that we have to, as an industry, come together to manage effectively. Because we don't want to go down this route again, where we're reintroducing proprietary protocols just to interact with the data that had already been normalized through an open protocol. So that's a very, really important. I think that's still something, again, I think that we have to solve as an industry. It's not just a silver bullet, it's done.
Yeah, the API, application programming interface, it's sort of like the encryptor for the data within. And if a service has that availability, then the data is fairly open. Even sometimes their API doesn't actually give you all their data, so be careful, right? Right. Have somebody review it first, make sure the API does have the data that you need to do the application you're hoping to do. So great question. All right, I hate to do this, I gotta wrap it up, so I just wanna thank the panelists, it was awesome.